The United States' provocation of China with regard to Taiwan continues unabated. And this is a subject, this is a flashpoint that isn't getting the attention it deserves right now. But certainly, as the United States is bogged down in the Middle East and West Asia with regard to Gaza and the rest of the axis of resistance, as Israel continues its onslaught with regard to Ukraine and the overall NATO proxy war with Russia, the United States may appear to be bogged down, but nonetheless has consistently made Taiwan and the Pacific theater its most primary and important theater of its military apparatus. So this has been made indelibly clear when we look at what was a completely disastrous interview that Joe Biden gave for Time magazine. And here's the full transcript. We're just going to go right down to Taiwan. Okay. And I want to first, this is the first question they asked. Pretty much everyone agrees managing the rise of China is the most important foreign policy and national security issue for America and Americans in the coming century. And mind you, when they were talking about Taiwan, when they're talking about foreign policy in Time magazine, they are speaking strictly from a neocon foreign policy perspective. If you get a chance to read the full interview, do, because you get the sense that Time magazine is also pushing a foreign policy agenda, and it's pushing the neocon foreign policy agenda. The CIA director, Bill Burns, the interviewer says, has made President Xi Jinping of China a concern because he's ordered the Chinese military to be ready by 2027 to conduct a successful invasion of Taiwan. You said on multiple occasions that you would use force to defend Taiwan. What does that mean? Is it boots on the ground? What shape would it take? Biden says it would depend on circumstances. By the way, I've made clear to Xi Jinping that what we agree with. We signed onto previous presidents going way back to the policy of that if we are not seeking independence, because we are not seeking independence for Taiwan, nor will we, in fact, not defend Taiwan if So it says, let me read this again because Joe Biden was quite incoherent during this interview. He said, so intervening in Taiwan depends on the circumstances. He's made clear with Xi Jinping that we signed on to previous presidents going way back to the policy of that we are not seeking independence for Taiwan, nor will we, in fact, not defend Taiwan if China unilaterally tries to change the status. And so we're continuing to supply capacity, and we've been in consultation with our allies in the region. So this is how Joe Biden answered. Then the next question was, if I might, not ruling out the possibility of deploying U.S. troops in the case of an invasion. Biden said, not ruling out using military force. There's a distinction between deploying on the ground, air power, and naval power. So maybe you're striking from bases in Philippines or Japan. Is that? And then Biden interrupts saying, I'm not going to get into it. You would then criticize me with good reason if I were to tell you. So that is how Joe Biden responded to questions, obviously making clear that the U.S., even if he is not so clear, making clear that the United States does look at war with China as a very near possibility, and that it is using the justification for its escalations around the fear of a future war that China starts, right? This always goes back to China, but nonetheless, to predict for some kind of future fear, some kind of future cataclysmic event, even if it were 100% true, means that you are still escalating and you are still being the aggressor, in that China has been very clear that it has taken the most decisive action around Taiwan only when the United States has sent delegations to Taiwan, congressional delegations, political delegations, that it has marked out pretty clear red lines on this issue, and that otherwise it has simply been conducting what is in its right, exercises, drills, preparations along its territorial waters, which, mind you, Taiwan is incredibly close to China. Some of its so-called islands under its authority are just a stone's throw away. So we have to always remember this. But yet here is the United States giving Taiwan an F-16 boost. So the latest arms sale was approved of $300 million in parts to Taiwan's F-16 fighter jets as the self-ruled island, they call it, strengthens its military with an eye on China. The sale serves U.S. interests by quote unquote supporting the recipient's continuing efforts to modernize its armed forces and to maintain a credible defensive capability. And this is according to a statement by the Pentagon's Defense Security Cooperation Agency. The DSCA said it had notified Congress, which typically approves arms sales to Taiwan. U.S. made F 16s form the core of Taiwan's air power. In December of 2023, the U.S. Air Force concluded a $4.5 billion Phoenix Peace Rising program to upgrade all 139 of Taiwan's F-16s into the modern Viper variant. Taiwan is still waiting for the additional 66 F-16V Block 70 fighters that Congress approved for sale in 2019. These have been met with delays and are now expected to be delivered in Taipei in batches over the next 2 years. And we're going to get into these delays very soon. So, per the request of Taiwan's de facto embassy in the U.S. De facto embassy. This is how they talk about it. De facto embassy. It's not a de facto embassy. That is a critical indication that the United States is very interested in separatism. All it is an American-funded institution that acts as an embassy, which is very much crossing China's red line. But nonetheless, the State Department has approved an estimated $220 million of standard and $80 million of non-standard spare and repair parts, as well as related supplies and technical and logistics support, according to the DSCA on Wednesday. If greenlit by Congress, the package will improve Taipei's ability to meet current and future threats, quote, by increasing the operational readiness of Taiwan's F-16, end quote. Taiwan's so-called foreign ministry on Thursday thanked the U.S. for its continued implementation of security commitments to Taiwan, pointing out that it's the 14th arms sales to be approved by the Biden administration. But I want to show you how absolutely egregious and ridiculous all of this really is. Because as we are talking about so-called arms sales to Taiwan, as we are talking about militarizing Taiwan for the purpose of war with China, there's something very important to note about this. And I want to be very, very clear about what this is really all about. Because as we have seen with Ukraine, there is absolutely no concern about the Ukrainian people, about the future of Ukraine, about its stability, about its economy, about peace, because the United States has been thwarting all of that, has been decimating all of that from the very beginning of the conflict. Ukraine had a way out. It had a peace agreement. It was signing it in April of 2022. And what did the United States do? The United States pushed and prodded and ultimately, I believe, had its own forces essentially allowing Ukraine to rebuke it. And of course, the war has continued on to this day. Now, Taiwan is no different. The United States doesn't care about the people in Taiwan. It doesn't care about quote unquote democracy. And what conflict has it really ever cared about such a thing? Taiwan, of course, is important for many reasons. Its semiconductor chip industry has become the target of U.S. machinations attempting to really outsource that industry to the United States as a way to try to outcompete China. A fantasy, but nonetheless, it's important. And of course, it is, as it long has been for the last several decades, dating back to the 1950s, the United States sees Taiwan as an important base hub, an unsinkable aircraft carrier in the region from which it can strategically make aggressive moves toward China, war maneuvers toward China. And of course, there are other considerations as well, including the fact that the United States wants to undermine China at the diplomatic level, weaken China's influence worldwide. And what better way to do that than to cause a kind of rift and division around standard agreements on who and what is the rightful leader of China, the People's Republic of China, at the United Nations. That is what Taiwan represents, the possibility to undermine Beijing politically. So there are many fronts of this war, but it is also important to note that Taiwan is also, simply put, a very convenient strategic location from which arms dealers, weapons manufacturers, and war profiteers can boost their own profits. Because while Michael McCall has made very interesting comments saying that what Taiwan will receive, recently he said these words in the month of May. He said Taiwan's weapons are going to be new, they're going to be ready to use, unlike those in Ukraine. A pretty stark admission that the Ukraine conflict is fraudulent. But let's be clear here. This whole model of war profiteering is not at all about military readiness. It is about making enormous amounts of profits. And what does this have to do with Taiwan? Well, those delays that you just heard are actually part of a long-standing backlog. Here is the Cato Institute, of course, a right-wing think tank connected to the U.S. government. But the Cato Institute says does Taiwan arms backlogs, and as of May 2024, we can just look at this very clearly. This backlog is almost 20 billion US dollars for such a small island. Arms sales backlogs by weapons categories. You have munitions at 2.66 billion, asymmetric warfare technology at 6.16, and the traditional military armaments at 10.87 billion. And then you can see the list, okay? And look at this versus May versus April, okay? You have now 19.69 billion being the difference. And then you can see the categories. Here is the F-16C Block 70 backlog that they were just mentioning with regard to the F-16s. So this is just an indication, right? In millions of dollars, you have here, right? So many millions of dollars in this technology, completely backlogged, not at all, not only not usable. This isn't even technology that can be used, weapons that can be used. It hasn't even gotten there yet. It is not deployed. That's the delays that they are talking about, okay? So when it comes to these arms sales, let us be very clear here that this is not a war that the United States is necessarily ready for. How long did it take for China to institute military drills that comprise of its entire military apparatus, from the Navy to the Air Force to its ground forces? How long did that take for China to do after Lai Ching-te, the new so-called president of Taiwan, gave a speech on May 20th stating that Taiwan was a nation? Immediately, the People's Liberation Army went into full force and conducted 2 days of drills, of military drills surrounding the island, blockading the island, or at least mimicking that for the time when it is actually needed to be conducted. So China is prepared for this conflict. Taiwan is simply being used as a prominent and important, but nonetheless a staging ground for war profiteering. This is a lot of what this has to do with. These weapons manufacturers are driving U.S. foreign policy and making it so that if anyone looks clearly at U.S. foreign policy with regard to China, you can see that the profits of weapons manufacturers, the profits of war profiteering, all take a pretty commanding place in why China is seen as this so-called threat. The bigger the threat, the more opportunities to invest in military armaments. And as we've seen in Ukraine, when you have backlogs such as these, when you have a production model such as this, dependent upon not long-term strategic use, but dependent upon short-term political and economic gain, well, then you have essentially already a failed strategy that will lead to disaster. And that is why so many believe that this would end rather than a kinetic military conflict between the United States lasting any significant period of time. They would immediately go nuclear because, one, Taiwan never had a chance. Let's be honest. It's a small island. It is historically Chinese. The one China principle is still very much in effect. The status quo, even though there's been independent sentiment that has been spurned and supported and that has been coddled by the United States and its proxies there. Nonetheless, the status quo is still very popular, meaning that most people don't want to see full independence because they don't want to see the war that would engender. So, all of this is to say is that the U.S. strategy here is a complete failure, but nonetheless, it is happening. And it is something that we need to be very much aware of because at any moment, this could kick off similar to how the Ukraine conflict was sparked. And this is back in February of 2024, something we've covered here, but always we need reminding that it isn't simply weapons, right? It isn't just this relationship with Taiwan, regardless of whether it's war profiteering or actually getting ready for a geopolitical cataclysmic conflict with China. Those two aims, the military and the economic, those aren't simply uh, uh, characterized by just handing weapons over or the lack thereof to Taiwan's so-called military authorities. Actually, there are U.S. special forces on the ground in Taiwan training troops near China's coasts. And the United Daily News of Taiwan reported that the training regiments, okay, that there's a permanent arrangement of training regiments that, rather on a rotational basis, are including permanent forces on an island just 6 miles away from the Chinese coast. So, these training regiments were planned and supervised by the 1st Special Forces Group, an airborne unit under the provision of last year's National Defense Authorization Act, which was signed in December 2022. Okay, so that's what's happening. The U.S. service members, that U.S. service members are training Taiwan's armed forces became clear in an open secret that was officially not officially acknowledged until 2021 during Tsai Ing-wen's tenure, where she said a few American instructors on the island were there for occasional training programs within the National Defense Authorization Act for 2023, however, opened the door to more robust cooperation between two security partners. Taiwan's defense ministry did not comment on this report, but said all foreign exchanges are conducted according to an annual plan. And the U.S. Defense Department spokesperson, Lieutenant Colonel Martin Mayers, had no comment for specific training, but said, quote, "I would highlight that our support and defense relationship with Taiwan remains aligned against the current threat posed by the People's Republic of China." So just some clarity on how close this really is to the mainland if we can just zoom out. Okay, so here is the mainland of China. This is Fujian province. Fujian province is the closest province to Taiwan. And here are the Kinmen Islands. Do you see? 6 nautical miles from China's coast. And in those 6 nautical miles, you can see that it's not just Kinmen, but there's Xiamen right there. Okay, very close. And then here's Penghu Island. So those are the 2 places where these exercises are occurring. And then the Daily News newspaper said Army Green Berets of the 1st Special Battalion Forces Group are this year permanently stationed at 2 bases of the 101st Amphibious Reconnaissance Battalion. The instructors were sent to the Penghu Islands near Taiwan, but also to Kinmen, a group of islands visible to the port city of Xiamen in eastern China on the Chinese side of Taiwan Strait. So that means Chinese people on the mainland can literally look out and see this island, and that is where these forces are training. I mean, this is incredibly dangerous. This is incredibly indicative of where things are going. Okay, so we start here with reckless comments. We started here with reckless comments by the Biden administration, by Joe Biden himself, talking about how U.S. troops will not be ruled out in a potential scenario where China invades Taiwan. And then we go to arms sales that are already happening, which are supposedly to prepare Taiwan for that invasion, to defend itself. Mind you, we've had Chinese official after Chinese official, most recently Dong Jun, the new defense minister, say very clearly that the goal is reunification, but that military means are the last resort. However, that military means would be used to crush separatists should they be given an opportunity to to be empowered and then to take the unthinkable move of declaring formal independence in violation of China's sovereignty, in violation of UN Resolution 2758, and in violation of the One China principle that virtually every country has signed on to with China, including the United States. And then you have the reality that actually the United States is not just simply politically supporting these forces, these separatists, it's not just militarily arming these forces in Taiwan, but it's also directly on the ground training separatist forces in Taiwan. So this is what crossing a red line looks like, and it's happening underneath our noses because no one is noticing. These stories come and go. They're small reports. They get overlooked. The conflict in Ukraine is a disaster. The genocide in Gaza is a historic miscalculation and catastrophe for the US's so-called rules-based order. But make no mistake, when Lloyd Austin said at Shangri-La that the Indo-Pacific Theater, as they're calling it, meaning the Asia-Pacific, is their most important area of strategic and military, in the U.S.'s military and strategic initiative. Its overall strategy is dependent on this. We should not ignore that. There's debates. I hear them. I get asked them all the time. Well, no, Russia's more important. No, actually, the Middle East is now more important. Look at the United States' posture there. And I would really caution anyone who actually believes this, when the fact of the matter is that despite being bogged down, and I believe with no intention of their own, I don't believe the neocons, I don't believe the United States was planning on getting bogged down in Ukraine. I think they underestimated Russia. I really do. I don't believe they thought that Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza would last as long as it has, because I do believe that they overestimated Israel's strength and their own in containing the powder keg and the resistance that exists in that region. All the while, even so, despite these monumental challenges to U.S. primacy, the United States has been building up to war with China over Taiwan. And I want to just show you how the Council on Foreign Relations, a CIA directed and led body, is talking about U.S. strategy. A 3-theater defense strategy, how America can prepare for war in Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. You notice which one is first? Asia. And I'm not going to get into the contents of it because it is a very long-winded article that basically makes one clear point, and that is that U.S. strategy, military strategy in a 3-front war needs to be conducted with essentially a long litany of so-called allies, basically vassals, that the United States needs to whip its vassals into shape, that the United States cannot win these wars by itself, and that if it has any chance to wrestle hold and control the situations in West Asia and the Middle East, in Ukraine and in Europe, and of course in the Asia Pacific theater, it's going to have to do so with a very strong, very disciplined, very militarized, and very much subordinate and compliant set of vassals. That is the goal, everybody. That is truly the goal here when it comes to the situation that the United States finds itself in. War is coming here. I hate to say this every single time that I cover China, but I've been to China several times, in the last 3 years. I've been there 3 times since 2020. And each and every time I go, every time I witness what's happening there, the first thought I have is the United States will never allow this to exist forever. Meaning, it will never allow what China is doing to occur under its watch without a massive response. And so, as the United States has been building up the foundations for that massive response, for that unthinkable war, a lot of people have had their eyes on other things, and and in many respects, that is to be understood. That is to be expected when the United States is now not only everywhere around the world militarily occupying, destabilizing via maybe covert means via proxy wars, this kind of thing. But now we have a situation where every hot flashpoint of military interventionism, everywhere where there is out and out warfare occurring, not only is the United States behind it and engineering it and egging it on and facilitating it, but these conflicts themselves have the potential, maybe in ways that we haven't seen in years and years and years since the Cold War, to spark a larger and broader conflict that I think many believed after the fall of the Soviet Union would never be possible again. So we are in a history shaking and earth shattering kind of epical shift here. And that means that something like Taiwan and this US-China war developing might get pushed essentially under the priority scale, below the priority scale of many people. And I say that is incorrect. That is a recipe for disaster. We turn a blind eye to this, and one day we might find ourselves very much rapidly in that unthinkable war that we had decided was not as important as those others. The United States isn't thinking like that. NATO isn't thinking like that. The neocons aren't thinking like that. The elites are not thinking like that. They are thinking about the whole of the U.S. full spectrum dominance doctrine, the whole of its strategy for maintaining and expanding U.S. primacy. And that means China, the war on China, as John Pilger so prolifically, and rest in peace and power to that hero of the peace movement, as John Pilger noted in his movie War on China, The Coming War on China. Indeed, this war is not only coming, but it has been built up toward even back in 2016, before the Trump administration massively escalated tensions with China, and before the Biden administration took the mantle and actually worsened the situation dramatically. This has been happening for a very long time. It's not something that the forces of war, the neocons, the foreign policy establishment are going to let go of. And that means that not only is war coming, but it is closer than it has ever been. And I think the evidence shows every arms sale, every report on new escalations regarding training and the like, and of course, the political growth of separatism on Taiwan fueled by U.S. policy. All of that signals that we are closer to that unthinkable war than we ever have been. Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve.
For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyHaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.